We're now going to move into the last session of this morning. Very interesting panel, which actually focuses on something that Tom just mentioned in his introduction. So when we speak about the term LGBTQ+, we talk about it sometimes as if it was one definition, but that's quite misleading, as if there's no distinction within the letters represented in that group. The tourism industry has been much faster actually to embrace gay or even lesbian travelers, and much slower to understand the needs of those who are either transgender or non-binary. Even veterans in the gay tourism space find themselves unsure of how best to be supportive of those new sectors. So our next panel, Stop Guessing, a conversation about identity and hospitality, is a candid discussion about the issues that non-binary and transgender travelers face and how our industry can better serve them. So now I'm going to invite to the stage all the people who are lined up behind me. Please do come up as I call you. Our moderator, Meg Ten Eyck, who is Chief Executive Officer at Everyqueer and also Director of Analytic Strategies at Travel Curator, and her panelists, Gabrielle Claiborne, who was already on stage yesterday, co-founder and CEO of Transformation Journeys Worldwide, Glo Ross, Program Officer at Arcus Foundation, and Jamie Harrell, Business Intelligence and Data Analytics at eMarie International. Welcome to the stage and enjoy your panel.
Good morning, everyone. I am so honored to be here today to moderate such an important panel discussion. But before we begin, I'd like to point out the fact that our panel today represents not only the future of IGLTA, but the future of the world. And I think that is a very important distinction. I also want to point out that this panel is going to be a little bit different because they gave me a mic and I have power. This is going to be a conversation. It's a conversation between us on stage and a conversation between you and the audience. So prior to the conference, we asked our attendees and our members, what do you want to know about trans and non-binary travelers, trans and non-binary people in business, and what can your business do to support trans and non-binary people? So every question in this panel is something that somebody in this room asked us anonymously. So that being said, we're going to have a portion at the end of this panel where you can ask any questions, ask for clarification. Nothing is off the table. We are also going to be doing something that's a little bit different. We've seen a lot of panel discussions that are a 101 level issue on gender identity and inclusion. And we've also seen a lot of stuff that could have been, a 7-day conference just on that topic alone. We're going to try to meet somewhere in the middle and be a little bit more practical with the conversation that we're having about how this applies to folks in the room and what you can do in your businesses and your day-to-day interactions with trans and non-binary people. I'm also going to be referencing my phone. I'm not scrolling Instagram. I'm checking my notes, just so you know. John, you're in the crowd checking me, I'm sure. So let's get started. We're going to start with one question that's a little bit more general, but let's talk about what are some of the biggest issues that transgender folks face while traveling. And whoever wants to begin, feel free.
So I'll jump in. First of all, TSA is not our friend, unfortunately. Just because, when we're going through security, a lot of times, even though TSA agents say they have been trained on how to handle gender diverse travelers, a lot of times they are either they've had minimal training or they haven't experienced real life case studies. And so consequently, and I know my friend here, Jamie, can speak to this as well, but going through that screener where you have to stand like this and spread your legs and hold your hands up, well, unfortunately, they have certain settings on that machine. And for trans and non-binary folks, a lot of times that process flags trans and non-binary travelers, and consequently, that perpetuates a whole nother security process where you're patted down, and oftentimes you're patted down in not the most respectful way. So TSA is not our friend. Another thing that TGNC MB folks experience when traveling is being repeatedly misgendered or mispronouned. we cannot overestimate the importance of understanding how to communicate with our demographic when it comes to respectful interaction. And I'm sure we're going to get into that a little bit more, so I'm going to reserve my comments on that. And then the third thing is just the everyday microaggressions that we experience traveling. You know, it's the passengers snickering or laughing as you're walking by. It's those things that the normal passenger doesn't realize that we as trans and non-binary folks are hypersensitive on and we pick up on. So if you're in the presence of our demographic as you're traveling, just understand these are the kind of things that, you know, we decide whether or not our travel experience is a positive experience or not so much of a positive experience. And I'll hand it over to Glo or Jamie.
I would love to talk about TSA. I think I have a Facebook kind of series, if you will, of posts that are tagged with Flying While Trans. And if you find me on Facebook, you'll find those public posts that catalog kind of a journey over time of the last 5 years of Flying While Trans. And a lot of these experiences have not been great. I think one of the things that you may not know is that TSA operates in pairs. There's a man and a woman, typically, that are at every TSA checkpoint. And the millimeter wave machine that we go through actually has a button. There's a pink button and a blue button. And they choose a gender as you walk into the machine because that machine sees everything. It sees everything. And they have to make a visual determination about your gender, who you are. And if you're presenting feminine, as I do, but your body anatomy does not match what is expected by the machine, you're going to be flagged with a body anomaly. You get a pat down. And when you step up for the pat down, one of the agents decides what your gender is, and the person of that gender goes to pat you down. And sometimes they don't ask. And can you imagine that experience of having someone of a different gender feeling around your body in a very disrespectful way? So I think TSA has a lot of work to do. I told a story yesterday about a really bad experience with TSA. I'm going to go into a different one today. But I do a fair amount of traveling, and once a year there's a convention in Vegas that I go to that is for trans people. I'm going to say it's less of a convention and more of a party. Can you imagine 300 trans women in Las Vegas at the same place at the same time? We're having fun. We get together we walk through the Cosmopolitan Casino as a group of 300 trans women to go take over the Chandelier Bar. And let me tell you, gambling stops when we walk through the room. The cards stop mid-air, the dice stop, and everyone turns around and look as 300 trans women take over the Chandelier Bar. But on that trip, I was staying at a hotel that was right off Strip. And it was a fabulous, fabulous trip. But I had checked in under my identification that was male. And after one of these parties, I returned from one of the parties as a female. And as I was getting on the elevator, I don't know who it was one of the people who worked at the front desk. I'm not going to tell you what brand this was. Stopped the elevator and stopped me in front of it and demanded to see my key card. And I thought to myself, why do you think this person thought I didn't belong here? And what did they think I was? And who did they think I was? And to me, because when we watch Law and Order on TV, the only trans representation in media is a prostitute who's dead. And this person was stopping me from going to my hotel room. I held gold or medallion, whatever was status in this company for the travel that I did. But they stopped me because they thought I was a prostitute, because my gender didn't match their expectations of who I was. So when we talk about the challenges that trans and gender nonconforming customers face with your organization, you need to think through some of these things as what does it mean when we have someone check in under a name that doesn't match the name that they use the next time that you see them? What happens when their pronouns are different from what's in your system? And if you're not thinking about these things at the level of your systems, what does your system do when it has their gender in your system. I mean, do you even need that most times, right? You probably don't. But think about these things. And if you don't have trans people in your organizations that are helping design these systems, that are helping make the decisions, if they're not in the boardroom, then you're not authentically connecting to that group. I think it was Miguel was talking about connecting with the trans people in your organization as well as in your community. So make sure to think about those things as you think through how to work with your trans non-binary customers.
Yeah, I mean, I have several TSA stories, you know, that I never really know. I feel like I want to say, press the pink one. No, press the blue one. But you know, either one, I'm gonna get patted down in the room next to the screening process. But you know, at Arcus Foundation, we're a private foundation that funds and social justice LGBTQ work in the U.S. and internationally, and so I'm sort of bringing the perspective of trans and gender nonconforming, non-binary folks of color, because those are the folks who we're funding, folks who are pushed most to the margins. And so this conversation around intersectionality that we just left off with the last panel is very, it's at play here too, right? Because I think for me personally, and then I know for folks in the communities in which we're funding, safety is a big, it's a big concern, right? And certainly when we're traveling, obviously, this is what we're talking about. Safety matters. It's a prerequisite, right? So, you know, there's discrimination based on sexual orientation, gender identity, and that's, you know, preventing you from getting access to goods or services, right? You're discriminated, whether overtly or sort of, you know, implicitly. But then there's also, when you think about the historical context of policing and criminalization, especially in the U.S., I don't want to speak for any other international location or country, but you also have a very real experience around criminalization, right? You get stopped and you get asked for your key card, and maybe that's an inconvenience for, you know, you of course, but also for the hotel staff. But there are other folks who get stopped and the police get called.
Right.
Right? So, and we know that. And so I think part of what we need to understand in terms of safety and travel is playing it a little bit forward and understanding what other systems are in place for folks who don't have a certain amount of privilege in different spaces. And what does that look like? And so, you know, I know in Atlanta right now, you can call 311 instead of calling the police. You can do that. To get someone to come out, an outreach worker, to come out and talk to someone who you don't want to call the police because someone, you know, you have questions about someone belonging, which is problematic in and of itself. But, you know, if you want to call somebody, you have an option that's not going to lead folks down a path of criminalization, incarceration, and detention. And I think it's important to name that folks experience that differently. And so I echo everything that's been said, and I just want to add that in there because it's important. You know, it's not maybe at the location of the hotel or when you're out to sites, but when you're in the community, when you're being a tourist, we're being a tourist with different assumptions and different access to resources and whatnot. So I think that's really important to name.
Yeah, excellent point.
Can I connect to that real quick?
Of course.
I want to say, when you're hosting these events, when you're looking at your company, when you're looking at the broader community that you work in, look to support the organizations that support trans people in your community. And in particular, look for organizations that are led by trans people of color that support the trans people of color in your communities. And I want to call out specifically, there's 2 organizations that I invited today that have booths today that need to be supported and funded in our community in Atlanta. It's the Trans Housing Coalition and Transcending Barriers. And you talked about you know, being incarcerated. Could you imagine being incarcerated and being put into the wrong gender population? And Transcending Barriers helps fight those types of things that happen in the US. So please, I don't know if they've made it here today, but donate to them after you buy your ticket to the event tonight. Donate just as much to these organizations, because that's part of why we're here, is to support the communities around the places that we do business.
And to be incarcerated in a different country.
Hello?
Yes.
Let's add to that.
That's Ed.
So let's talk about some of the things that we see in travel and hospitality businesses. So this is a two-parter. What are some of the mistakes that you see businesses making, and what are some of your suggestions for practical solutions to correct those mistakes?
So, without calling out anybody,
Call them out. Just kidding. Don't.
I will do it non-discreetly. Okay, I'll call them in. Thank you. Good, love that. So, if you're in the travel industry, if you're in the airline industry, I can't tell you how many times I've been sitting on a plane about to take off, and the attendant says, "Ladies and gentlemen,
Yes.
guess what? You just left out non-binary folks, right?" So we have to be mindful of gender-inclusive language. And gender-inclusive language requires a real intentional understanding of, if you're a cisgender individual, which maybe most of you are here in the audience, you have to understand that there is something much bigger than our binary culture that we have been raised in. The culture is shifting. Gender is becoming a whole lot more diverse than what many of us were raised and even taught to believe about gender. So making sure that you understand the importance of gender-inclusive language, even to the point of when if you're in a front of house role and you're greeting a traveler for the very first time, you cannot look at that person based on their gender expression, nor on their name, nor on their vocal inflection and say, Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so, okay? Again, that is binary language. Did you know that there is a new gender-neutral title for gender diverse individuals? It is MX, the letters MX, and it's pronounced mix, MX, or MUX, and many non-binary and intersex individuals use this gender-neutral title. So if you're collecting reservations, whatever service you're providing in the travel industry, are you providing options for us to self-ID ourselves in the process, so that when we do show up, and however we show up in your place of service, are you prepared to respectfully address us as gender diverse individuals? So that's just, gender neutral language is very important. And if you want to learn more about gender neutral language, feel free to visit our website, Transformation Journeys WW. We have a blog page, and we also have a resources page that could be, it could offer you some suggestions on how to do that.
And that's such a great point. I think a lot of folks in the hospitality industry think that we're not going to be polite if we don't say ladies and gentlemen, or we don't use an honorific title. But saying, good morning, everyone, or good morning, folks, or here in the South, good morning, y'all, is just as friendly and welcoming as good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and is a better solution to provide a safe and welcoming environment for a wide variety of people.
Well, I guess, too, they told me my mic wasn't working, so they gave me the stick mic. So this is why I'm like, I might bust out into a song. I don't know.
Own it.
Oh no, wait for it. So I think to parlay off of Gabrielle's comment here around the pronouns and welcoming and greeting, I think it's generally just a question about all the areas of our lives in which gender is bifurcated, right? Bathrooms, we know in the US has been a big battleground. Sports right now is a big battleground, but it's also, gyms, spas, changing rooms, right? I'm gonna go get my eyeglasses again today, any new ones, and I know there's gonna be a men's section and there's gonna be a women's section. And so thinking about in your services, in your goods, what are the ways that gender is being bifurcated? And how can you reimagine a way of providing that good and service so that you're reaching folks who are not participating in the binary, right? So I think that is generally a good thing to just keep in mind. And I made a checklist because I'm a checklist person.
I love that.
So here you go. Okay, here's my checklist. Does my service or product reinforce a gender binary? If yes, don't do it. Does my service or product require people to disclose their birth name or gender marker? If yes, don't do it. Does my service or product require any sort of validation of identity? If so, how can you get the information you need while respecting that some people's preferred name may actually not match the documents that they brought with them, right? And the last one is, does my service or product disrupt a gender binary and provide a way for all people to participate regardless of gender expression or identity? And if you're doing that, keep doing it.
Absolutely, thank you. And no job description needs he or she on it.
Right.
There's this word called they
Yeah.
that we use all the time in everyday language. Who's calling? Who's on the phone? Oh, I don't know, they didn't give me their name. We use this all the time. You never need to say he or she in any situation, particularly in business. But I think in terms of what companies can do better, and I like to talk a lot about introspectively, what can you do in your company? Quit asking marginalized people to do your DEI work for you for free. There are organizations that are trans-led organizations that will teach your companies how to do this, and you can pay them a reasonable rate for the work that they bring to the table. There are ways that you can compensate your LGBT, trans, non-binary people in ways that they bring, things that they bring to the table more than the work that they do every day. Maybe instead of paying them less, pay them more. So think about what you're doing internally, because what you're doing internally reflects the people that you can sell to. And if you're not employing trans people, non-binary people, and if you're not working for non-binary inclusion, then you're not working for trans inclusion, and you're not working for real diversity and inclusion in your business. So look, introspect into what you're doing for your trans people at your business and those in your communities around you.
Can I expand a little?
Of course.
One more thing? So I'm going to give you some, I love the tangible things you can do. I love that. If you are front of house and you are greeting your guest and you have a name tag, put your pronouns on your name tag. This is a great way to send a message to the person that you're communicating with that you're educated on the importance of pronouns. If you are providing customer service over the phone, understand that you cannot say sir or ma'am based on vocal inflection, nor can you say that based on perhaps the data you have in front of you. So as you're communicating, get education around what you can do, scripts that you can create for your customer service to be inclusive for everyone. These are just some small things that you can do, but they go a long way in making sure that your gender diverse patrons are going to feel seen and heard.
Wonderful, wonderful point. So now that we've talked about all the negative, let's make it positive. It can be a travel brand, but it doesn't have to be. It can be any business that you've interacted with. I'd love if you would take an opportunity to kind of shout out brands or businesses that are doing the work, that are committed to the trans and non-binary communities, that are doing it right, so that everyone in the audience has a model that they can use to build their inclusion policies and practices on.
I was impressed with Discover Puerto Rico's video today. Anybody else?
Yes.
And I didn't catch her name. Assuming
Leah.
Thank you. Assuming she's she, her. I'm making an assumption there. But to see people who look like me or look like us in their marketing, in their messaging, goes a long way in me saying, okay, that is perhaps a destination for me, right? And more times than not, when an organization is doing something like that, they have had this sense of awareness that there's something that they're not doing that they need to improve on. So more times than not, those organizations that are at that level of marketing have already done some internal work on educating themselves on how to create this inclusive culture for gender diverse individuals. And I love the point that one of the panelists made just before this conversation around you can't stop the conversation. You know, continue leaning into conversation and continue learning, because I will tell you, even though gender diverse folks have been visible for, really visible the last 10 years, things are continuing to evolve. So you have to continue to stay engaged. You have to continue leaning into the conversation, because if you want to stay on the crest of the wave as opposed behind it, you have to do that. And I'll yield to you all.
Do you have any?
I do. It's not specific to the travel industry, but I want to say, who loves their insurance company? Anyone in the room? Oh, come on. I do. Okay, I'm gonna shout them out just because they do such a fabulous job. USAA is a pretty amazing company, and when I changed my name with them, I changed my gender marker with them, and to this day, I can call them at 7 or 9 o'clock in the morning after being in Las Vegas with 300 trans women partying at the Cosmopolitan, sounding like Marge Simpson's sister, hello, and they will never misgender me. They get it right every single time, and I don't know what they do, but there's something in their computer system that says, this is the pronoun that this person uses, and it flashes, it must flash up on their screen, because I can tell you in the morning my voice is really deep. And they get it right every time, and it's pretty amazing. So I think if anyone has connections with those companies, or with USAA that they can speak to, what are you guys doing because you're doing it right? That would be a great lead for you.
Now I'm like, I need to look at my insurance company. I was drawing a blank, but I think one of the things that does come to mind is Delta. And I don't know if it's because I live in Atlanta and I know a lot of folks who work at Delta. And I don't think it's really in particular anything Delta as a company has done to me as a consumer, but I think they just live their values through their people, and then I interact with their people. And I think, well, yeah, I'm totally gonna fly in Delta, right? That might be a totally Atlanta biased response. But yeah, I think that's important, is to sort of make sure you're living, I think in the panel before us, living those values too through the people that you hire and retain, because they're in the community representing you no matter what, right? So.
Yeah,
And if one more shout out, Fort Lauderdale.
yes, Fort Lauderdale, thank you.
Up here before us, when they were intentionally reaching out to the trans, did I lose me? Okay, I hear I'm back. Trans community in that area, they intentionally pulled them in as a part of the solution. This is exactly how you do this, because trans people don't just exist in Atlanta. You know that. They exist across the whole world. So lean into your community, your local community, because they could be a huge asset for you. And the trans community wants to help, of course, for a fair value.
Another couple examples of brands that are doing a really great job. Uniworld Cruises has trained their entire staff in LGBT inclusion, including gender identity and expression. There's so many, but the Travel Corporation has been mentioned a couple times. They have also trained many of the staff in their brands, including Kontiki, which I have had the pleasure to work with in the past. And Kontiki really focuses on non-binary travelers, some of the issues that young transgender people are facing as they are a business that focuses on 18 to 35 years old, and generator hostels. I was blown away. A couple years ago, I was traveling with a partner who is non-binary. We went to the website because we were going to do an ad campaign with them, and they had non-binary representation on the main page of their website. So there are a lot of examples of brands who are doing wonderful work within the trans community, within the travel industry, and beyond.
I do want to actually call out Delta again here, because I know their insurance policies for their trans employees covers more than the bare minimum. You can't rank 100 on the HRC index without covering more than hormones and surgery and bottom surgery, right? You have and top surgery for trans men. You have to go above and beyond as a company, and I know Delta does that. I'm sure there are other brands in this audience who are doing that today, and I hope you don't feel like I'm leaving you out. Maybe shout out when it comes to question and answer, because if you're covering more than just the bare minimum, then you're beginning to do well by your trans employees.
Definitely. I'm like scrolling through and I'm like, wow, we're nailing it. We covered so many of these already. But I want to talk about the reservation systems and the data collection systems, particularly from a perspective of a non-binary traveler. Have you guys noticed anybody who's doing this system well? Do you have any recommendations on resources that they can reach out, people in business can reach out to in order to, when they are redoing their forms or their intake, that this is an example of something that we should be modeling after?
So I know that there are a few airlines that are actually acknowledging and recognizing the X gender marker. If you all are not familiar with an X gender marker, that is a gender-neutral gender marker that many non-binary and intersex individuals are using to identify their gender. So certain airlines are starting to make provisions for non-binary
United
travelers.
is one of them.
Huh?
United Airlines.
United Airlines, thank you, is actually providing provisions for an individual to indicate their gender on their reservation. And just getting through the reservation process, if you're not providing those types of provisions, if you do have an X gender marker, and Glo, I would love to hear your perspective on it. If you do have a X gender marker on your legal ID, what are you having to navigate? Are you having to explain that to someone who perhaps is not educated to understand what does that mean? And if you're traveling, to other countries, there is also a U gender marker designation for unspecified. Mm-hmm. So those are the gender-neutral gender marker designations that you need to be aware of.
Well, and there are 14 countries now that have gender-neutral passports. Right. So just be mindful that this is going to be something that we're going to be seeing more and more of in the future, and updating our record keeping and our systems and reservations is going to be even more important as new countries introduce a third passport option.
And there are 20 U.S. states that allow their citizens to use an X gender marker on their driver's license. And we, from a resource perspective, my company provides this type of resources. So again, feel free to visit our website at transformationjourneys.www.com.
So the next one's going to be a little bit of a tough question. It's a multi-parter. I know somebody from media wrote this question. I don't know who you are, but I know. Okay. Transgender visibility and mainstream travel is often presented on platforms and to destinations that actively cause harm to the transgender and non-binary communities, such as those that erase diverse identities or support anti-LGBT legislation. Mainstream travel has increasingly been leveraging the digital networks of LGBTQ media and influencers to reach the transgender and non-binary markets. Should queer and transgender media outlets and creatives lend their talents to change the industry from within? And if so, how can they earn profit while delivering social justice messaging to transform imperfect brands and destinations? How can mainstream travel develop anti-oppressive marketing to better support the community? In short, is it possible to be out without selling out? That's definitely a writer.
Okay. I think What was the question? I'm sorry. No, I think the important thing is that, and we heard this earlier today, is that what governments say matters. And as an industry, we have an opportunity to influence a bit of those in the industry around us, as well as those governments around us that we do business with. And, are there ways to assert our influence, to make the destinations that we're selling, the location, maybe the resort that you go to, as friendly? But are you working with the community around you to make sure that it's friendly? Are you working with the police around you to make sure that your customers who do have an interaction with the local police can feel safe? And I think, should we as trans and non-binary participants of the media and work towards making the industry in those locations more accepting, I don't know if that's the right word, but more safe is really the right word. The answer is absolutely yes, but not for free.
So, to Jamie's point, you all have to create budgets for everything that you do in your workplace, in your services. Create a budget for this type of support. Because just as we have seen in Netflix and other networks that are actually allowing trans people to not only write, produce, and perform and act in their authenticity, when you budget and you are able to bring trans resources into your organization and help you provide, help you create the messaging in the correct way, in an equitable way, it goes a long way in reaching us and not being a pink wash effort. So budget for these types of services.
Well, I admit I had to print this question out because I was like, honey, I can't remember all this. But I think, I don't, maybe it's sort of like, because I identify as non-binary and I don't really like to choose, I'm like, this is a false question. It's both, it's everything, right? I think social media influencers, for sure they should make money. I don't make money helping advertise brands or companies to help them become better and more accepting and more inclusive. Like, do you? I don't see any problem with that. I think what is becoming clear to me from this question is, like anything, I think the underlying theme of what our conversation is this is not transactional, this is relational.
Right.
Right? And so if you start from that premise, then you and your business or your services and how you look at the world shifts. And it shifts about who are the people that we care about that want to access our services and our goods, and how do we make that possible? And there's the horrible plus, slash great part of that is you're never gonna find one answer. It's gonna be a continual exploration. And so that's where I think like companies that are not on board yet, I'm like, Chick-fil-A, can you please get it together? I know that's never gonna happen. But, I don't know what's it gonna take, but I know that doesn't mean we don't get to have the conversation. And we don't get to keep coming back and saying, okay, what else can we do? And hold folks accountable. And so I think that the moving away from it being a transaction to it being relational helps us develop a culture of accountability too, where we can say, I'll buy your brand, but I'm not just someone with money. Like, I'm a person with dreams and a community and needs and, and all of that. And so I think it's a bigger question. I totally sidestepped the direction.
It's totally fine.
I would be horrible at a media press conference.
There's like
I would
9
never
questions
answer the
within
question.
the question. I think that was a brilliant answer. And I think that we have time for one more question from my list, and then we're going to open it up. But I'm just going to preface this by saying, don't underestimate my ability to wait in an awkward silence. You guys got like 2 minutes to think about it. From the list I have here, where can people find information that would be beneficial to them as business owners or business people in supporting the trans community, particularly in the travel and hospitality and service industries? What would you recommend that they look for, be it a website, an organization such as yours, or even folks that they can reach out to who are activists? And I would like to point out that not every member of a marginalized community is an activist. And it's not every member of a marginalized community's responsibility to educate from within, and that's not only true for the trans and non-binary community. Please do not just go to Joe in accounting and be like, you're gay, what's our pride campaign? It's not it.
I'll just say one really quick one that I have is a ARCIS grantee, the Williams Institute, partners out of UCLA, does a great deal of studies on the experiences of LGBTQ and intersex folks around the world in different countries, including the US, and does so with an understanding of intersectionality and an understanding of, you know, it's not just sexual orientation or gender identity that they're focusing on, but a whole host of other social determinants of health and perspectives and experiences and all of that. So the Williams Institute, they have studies for, you know, several countries that are surveying folks in those countries. So.
One of my favorite resources is PFLAG. They have a guide to being a trans ally. And it's a relatively quick read, but it's very detailed, and it goes through a lot of terms and you know, kind of the basic stuff, but also talks about you know, how to learn more and learn deeper, and to put that burden on you, the ally, rather than on the trans people. I think, you know, don't go to your trans person in marketing and say, okay, time to give a seminar, unless you're going to pay them for it. You know, do the work ahead of time, and PFLAG's guide to being a trans ally is a great place to start.
And if you're here in the U.S., you need to know about the National Center for Trans Equality. They're the largest advocacy organization for transgender, nonconforming, non-binary folks here in the U.S. So they do a lot of advocacy work across multiple lived experiences for the community. So inform yourself through that organization and understand the work that they're doing, and perhaps even, you know, find a way to contribute to their organization, as well as all these organizations that we're sharing with you.
Wonderful. So we do have time for about 3 questions. Fair warning, I am light blind, so I cannot see you raising your hands. But if there are any questions, we would love to answer them from the audience, and they can be a range of things from, you know, conversations around your business practices, conversations around travel. We did have a couple questions that were asked that we have not gotten time to address that were specifically for transgender travelers looking for information. So if
This is a safe space, y'all.
Yeah.
Okay?
I have a question. My name is Tico. Hello, my name is Tico. This is great information. I've learned so much just today, so thank you again. Thank you and congratulations. Well, I represent multiple destinations in Louisiana, the deep South. And so a lot of times we hear, oh, I was raised that way. Well, that's polite to say, ma'am, sir, etc. So as a representative of multiple destinations, how would I approach my clients and asking them, hey, I would love to bring you folks in to do a training? Because the hotels are, you know, most destinations, the hotels are your front line. And that's the introduction to a destination. So the training is so important. So how would I approach, a good way to approach my clients and asking if this would be something they would like to do to train their individual hotels, restaurants, any destination or any activities within or attractions within each destination?
Okay, well, I guess you pick up the phone and you call me and we'll have a conversation. And I can share some business case reasons for why this conversation is relevant for you right now. And if you want to set yourself up as a destination of choice, we talk about employer of choice, but you want to be a destination of choice or a provider of choice, you have to understand why this conversation is relevant. You know, I will share with you just a few stats, okay? Just last month or a couple of months ago, there was a Williams Institute report that released that right now here in the U.S., and I'm sorry that this is only a U.S. stat, but in the U.S. there's 1.2 million non-binary individuals here in the U.S. So are you wanting to tap into that demographic? And it's not if, it's when. They're going to want to show up in your place of business. You know, 2017, there's a Harris poll that revealed that 12% of millennials identify as some form of trans or non-binary. Do you want to provide services for that demographic? I've shared with you about the statistics for the X-gender marker. You know, everywhere I go, you know, I hear, I'm bombarded with binary language. And if you want to be respectful in however you're providing services to your patrons, you have to understand that language is much more broader than binary language. And I can continue to give you some business case reasons for why this is important, but sincerely, please reach out to us and we will have a conversation with you. And you know, a lot of times we do free consultations just for this very reason, to say, here's what you need to be mindful of, okay? You don't know, I think I said yesterday, a lot of times we don't know what we don't know. Right. And our job is to help you understand and expand what you don't know that you don't know, and make that work for you as opposed to against you. I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely, thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I add to that? As businesses, we're thinking transactionally, right? Thank you for bringing that up. But you're thinking about your customers. You know, what can we attract LGBT and trans customers? You know, but trans and non-binary and gender non-conforming people exist across every spectrum of society,
Right.
across every demographic, and we're not just your customer. We're probably your employee.
Ding, ding, ding.
Might be your child. And so if you're thinking just transactionally, you're not thinking relationally, and you're not thinking about those people who are in my community that I can help by expanding my business to be more LGBT and specifically trans-friendly.
Any other questions?
I'm over. Hi. Over in this corner.
Okay.
Hi, my name's Andrea. Pronouns are she, her. This is less a question for all you on the panel, but I wanted to speak to, and I'm feeling a little trepidation as I do this, but my question is to IGLTA and everyone here who are members, how we can increase inclusion of trans and non-gender or non-binary individuals, because I came first-time attendee, and I feel very much like if it weren't for the people on the stage, I don't see people like me here.
Yeah.
So where are you hiring? Where are you bringing people in? And I'm very proud of my employer, SimpleView, who sent me, even though I'm actually a new employee, because they're like, you need to be there. We want you there.
Yeah.
So what are you all doing in your companies and your organizations so that we're not just saying, kudos to Fort Lauderdale, to Puerto Rico, to all these groups that are putting out the visible, but I want to see me when I'm in a place like this. I want to see me when I go to your business. That's what I want to see. So how are you all going to do that? I don't know if there's anything you want.
Andrea, thank you for your visibility.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Yes, you can.
Felipe.
Felipe is the president of the IGLTA Association Board, who will be addressing the answer to that question.
Andrea, thank you for your question, and good morning to everybody. I would say maybe not on behalf of the entire board and the association, at least take this response as a personal response from Felipe Cárdenas. I have a story to share regarding your question. Yesterday, a nice group of women invited me here after the conference to my first time in life to a lesbian bar.
That might have been.
And you know what was the feeling? I was embarrassed as chairman of IGLTA, talking about inclusive tourism for over 10 years in my country, Colombia. And just last night, going for the first time to experience and to observe how women feel safe in a space without men. And I learned. So trying to answer your question, the first thing that I would say is I don't have an answer. So we need you here, and more of you here. The second thing that I would say, and especially to all my fellows and folks and friends that are men, we just need to stop being lazy. It's easy to do gay travel. It's been 40 years. It became easy. It's organic sometimes. And I always hear, and I have been part of those groups that says, the lesbians are too complicated, they just don't come. That's not true. We just don't go to get them, which is different. And the same we are saying with trans individuals. So my message, and this I do want to say it on behalf of the IGLTA board and as a new chairman of this board, let's stop being lazy and let's do our job. And I believe for 4 decades already, it's been about us. And I'm glad that you girls and guys and everyone that is coming for the first time in this convention, especially women and especially trans individuals, are finally starting to come. I believe this might be a sign that this is your time. Thank you.
So I believe we are out of time for today, but we will all be here through the remainder of the day, and several of us will be at Voyage tonight. So if you have any more questions or any more points of conversation that you want to bring up, please, please, please come up to us and let's talk about diversity and what we can do to improve the experiences of diverse populations here at IGLTA, including the transgender and non-binary community. Thank you.